Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Alameda County Notice of Funding Opportunity Bidders Conference. On behalf of the Leadership Board and the staff at Everyone Home, I welcome you to today's meeting. It's a great honor to be in the same virtual space with who I consider to be Alameda County's most valuable players. So thank you for joining us today. We have taken steps to really try to ensure that this year our process is as streamlined as possible, that we give as much support to applicants as possible, and ultimately create an application that is as competitive as possible for this year's HUD application. I'm going to pause and start our meeting off by allowing you an opportunity to get to meet the team who has been working jointly on our application. And so this year, Everyone Home is joined with consultants with Homebase, and I am Chelsea Andrews, the Executive Director for Everyone Home, and I will ask each of my staff to also introduce themselves, followed by Homebase, who will also do introductions. And so I'll pass to Tirza White.
Hi, I'm Tirza White. I am the Senior Director of System Performance and Data Analytics for Everyone Home. Thank you for being with us today.
Also, we have Katie Haverly, who's not on the Zoom. She's our Director for Research and Data Analytics. Katie Martin.
Hello, I'm the Systems Planning Coordinator here at Everyone Home.
Thank you. And Dorcas Chang.
Hi, I'm Dorcas Chang, Operations Coordinator with Everyone Home.
Great. Thank you, Dorcas. And I'd also like to thank our consultants in advance for all of the hard work they're doing and pass it over to Aram for introductions of your team.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Aram Housley. I'm with Homebase. I'm a senior staff attorney. Homebase is glad to partner with Alameda County, and we work all throughout the Bay Area, California, through the US, and on the issue of homelessness and providing support. So we're well versed in doing NOFAs and NOFOs. And with that, I will ask Esther to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name's Esther Wilch. I'm a senior staff attorney at Homebase. Happy to be here, and I'll pass it to Max.
Good morning, everyone. Max Disher, staff attorney with Homebase. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you.
Back to you.
I also want to give a moment and allow the community to see the members who are comprised of our NOFO committee and thank them, quite frankly, in advance for their time and their stewardship. Our NOFO committee members, some of whom might be in the room with us today, are volunteers who are non-conflicted members of our community who will be guiding this process, who had input in regards to our ranking and scoring for this application, and quite frankly are going to be contributing multiple hours to making sure that our application is as competitive as possible. And so you see their names on the screen. We also have an appeals board that's been designated as well, and reflects the fact that if there are any challenges, the NOFO appeals board would meet to review any applications that raise challenges. And so with that, I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to Aram with Homebase, who will give an overview of this year's application process.
Great, thank you, Chelsea. So, as you know, the 2021 CoC NOFA came out, or maybe you didn't know and you're finding out right now. So you're with all of us now. Today, what we're here to do is a few things, but first, before we get going, if I could ask Esther or Max maybe to drop into chat. This is a contact form that helps us stay in the loop, helps you all stay in the loop with us and make sure you're getting emails. So if you're here, there's a good chance you are in the loop, but in case somebody is not at the meeting and you think they would benefit, then they can get some information Everything that we provide today, including recording, slides, and all the materials, will be available to everyone online. So all of this will be made accessible certainly by the end of the day when things kick off. And so we'll follow with an email to many of you, but that's a good way to stay in the loop with us. So there's a contact form, sign up on the chat now. I kind of assume at this point, most folks are familiar with Zoom, but there's a few things you can look around. Usually there's a bar that comes up as you're looking at stuff, and that's where you'll find chat or the other participants, or if you're going to come off mute, you'll see all those things. If you're not seeing something, sometimes there's 3 little dots, and those dots will bring up more options like chat and things like that. So we are going to try and move through this all and answer questions as we go. So put things into chat, but we'll certainly pause and we'll just kind of see how we're doing on timing. If we're running out of time, we'll speed up a little bit, but really want to make sure everyone gets their questions answered. So the agenda for today is as follows. We're going to do some background on the NOFO. If you've been doing this before, it's been called the NOFO in the past. They changed the A to an O. So now instead of availability, we have bright opportunity ahead of us. So that's what we're going to start with. Then we're going to speak specifically about what funding is available within Alameda County, kind of a note on kind of how HUD and we all have to consider tiering, although this year a little bit easier than the past, but that's the ranking piece. Talk about eligible new projects. There is what they call bonus money available to folks. And so that allows you to create new projects. As I'm speaking, sometimes I'll kind of explain further because we may have new folks in the room, but if you're still missing something, or we use lots of acronyms in the homeless world. So if you are not familiar with something, just put it in the chat and we'll make sure to get it. But a lot of you may have done this before, but there are some changes and some of you are new. So we'll also then kind of go into specifics about the local process, the timeline, what scoring criteria is being used again that has been approved by the aforementioned NOFO committee, and also some changes that were approved by the committee, but that may be new to you if you haven't been involved in any of the public meetings that have happened thus far this year, and we haven't had an NOFO since 2019, so it's been a little while. We will then talk about the materials to apply, some resources like our handbook that we produced that should help you apply for this and your larger eSNAPS HUD, and then certainly, time permitting, we'll do questions. We will be sure to take down questions. We're getting a lot, and you'll notice that we'll have a kind of an FAQ period so that people who are asking questions, other folks can see them, especially since you may have the same questions. So that's how we're going to start today. I think initially we might have messaged that renewals could maybe be able to step out a little. I think as we've looked at things, it makes sense to stay throughout the time, especially if you might be interested in a new project. But in terms of the flow, it'd be best to stay through the end. We have time through 11, so we'll see if we need that time, and if not, we can do questions, or folks can have a little time back in their day. So again, put questions in chat if you need to. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Esther, who's kind of going to do some background and talk about some HUD priorities and noteworthy changes. So Esther.
Thanks, Aram. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Yeah, so just a little bit of NOFO background. I know Aram just said it, but a number of people have joined, so I will just reiterate. NOFO is the same as NOFA, except they have changed the name from Notice of Funding Opportunity. From Notice of Funding Availability to Notice of Funding Opportunity. So we will do our very best to call it NOFO and to say opportunity, but if you hear someone refer to it as NOFA, just know they're the same thing if this is sort of your first time. So NOFO is HUD's biggest competition to get homeless dollars. It is a competition among approximately 450 continuums of care across the country. And there are $2.7 billion available nationally. So it is a big, big deal. The NOFO this year was released on August 18th, 2021, this year. Obviously, it kept us all on our toes, but it finally came out. And there's about 3 months to do the whole thing from the date that it was released on the 18th of August. You can read the NOFO on your own if you are interested in doing that, but Homebase has also put together this presentation and a lot of other background materials so that hopefully you don't have to read the whole thing, and we will make all of those available to you. And just by way of real overview, the NOFO basically consists of 3 parts in a CoC consolidated application. So for the Alameda CoC, the collaborative applicant is going to submit 3 different things to HUD. The first of these is the CoC application, and that's just basically an overview of what is going on in the whole geographic area of the Alameda CoC. So what you all are doing in terms of planning, in terms of strategy, and then, youth, unsheltered, all kinds of stuff that way. The second thing that is part of the NOFO is the project priority listing. So this is how projects within the CoC are ranked and prioritized locally in case there's not money to fund everyone within the CoC that wants to be funded. And then number 3 is the individual project applications, which there will be a lot more information on later. Next slide, please. Yeah, so a little bit about the 2021 HUD CoC policy priorities. So these are all things that have more or less always been within the NOFO, but some of them maybe are being called out more this year or being called out less, and we just wanted to, from the outset, bring your attention to them. So some revisions in 2021, there's an emphasis on ending homelessness for all persons, and there's a sort of softening on system performance measures. Back again in 2021 is a real emphasis on housing first. Under the previous federal administration, I think that the housing first emphasis, it had been de-emphasized a little. It's back with a vengeance. Housing first is a threshold criteria for the CoC NOFO. So basically, if you're not doing it, you're not eligible. And housing first, just by way of very brief introduction, is low barrier housing, getting people into housing without strings attached, and then getting them sort of set up for supportive services. So no background checks, no mandatory drug testing, no mandatory meetings, that kind of thing. If you are not familiar with housing first, or if you have questions about it, please reach out to us. We have a lot of different resources that we can help you with. But again, that is a threshold criteria that is very much back this year. And a couple of things that are new in 2021, and I just really want to focus your attention to these, are reducing unsheltered homelessness, partnering with housing, health, and service agencies, a focus on racial equity, and a focus on persons with lived experience. These are things that have specifically been highlighted and called out in this year's NOFO. And as a result, we, Homebase and Everyone Home and the CoC, the NOFO committee met and revised the scoring tools in order to highlight and bring these to the forefront as we're doing the local competition as well. So these are really important things to look in on. They're going to impact the score overall of the NOFA. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then a couple of other noteworthy changes. First and foremost, for the first time, tribes and tribally designated housing entities are eligible to apply. This is not something that Homebase has a ton of experience in, but we are very excited about this, and we really want to encourage anyone who has connections to projects or people that would fit into this to reach out to us, because it is certainly something that we want to we want to help with that. It's an exciting new change. Another change is that there's been a de-emphasis in system performance, but there's a caveat down below, and I'll just highlight it now. They have noted that system performance as a measuring tool will sort of be back with a vengeance in 2022. So we're not really changing the way that we look at system performance this year. Some new priorities, determining and addressing the impact of COVID-19. I think part of the reason that there is less of an emphasis on system performance is just the recognition of the enormous impact that COVID-19 has had on all of us. And so there is space to address that within the application, promoting racial equity in homelessness and in the local CoC process, as well as inclusion in the local planning process of current and former homeless persons with lived experience, partnerships with housing, health, and service agencies. And again, system performance will be a high priority again in 2022. So we are not really changing the way that we approach that. Really important to highlight these bottom changes, which are that there are up to 10 bonus points if a CoC's priority listing includes new project applications created through reallocation or the CoC bonus that utilize housing subsidies or subsidized housing units funded through sources other than CoC or ESG, and healthcare provided through an array of healthcare service providers. So if you are able to leverage non-CoC funds, non-ESG funds, or this healthcare, that's 5 points each that you can get to add it on to help the entire community, which is pretty massive when you're talking about 200 points total. So those are just some things to flag. And with that, I will hand it back to Aram to go over some of the funding specifics for Alameda.
Perfect. Thanks, Esther. So that was some of the background to give you a sense. HUD each year tends to revise a little bit kind of their priorities, and they change things because of COVID. They've kind of changed a bunch in terms of what the community is going to be responding to. A lot of that will be done at the collaborative applicant level. And so that's the county itself who will submit kind of this package all together. And so they have to speak to basically what the community is doing. Since we have a couple of questions in the chat, I'm just going to grab them now. There was a question I put in our email, but who's the best contact if they want more information about Housing First? You certainly can reach out to Homebase. That's our email that reaches our team, Alameda@Homebase. We'll put that up a couple more times as well. There's a lot of great resources online that really speak to how to implement, and for those who aren't sold on it, really that it works. And there's a ton of evidence at this point since probably the 90s that Housing First works, as opposed to when we used to kind of get folks like ready. You had to like have a job or be in therapy or be sober before we offered housing. So they've kind of flipped that on its head. But many of you and Alameda are already working hard and doing that. There's another question about these bonus points, and we'll speak to that more. So when we talk about points, there's two places to talk about points. One is the whole CoC. That's the continuum of care. That's Alameda County. That's the geographic area of Alameda County. The whole CoC has to submit an application about what the whole CoC is doing. And that includes often a reference to system performance measures. If that's new to you, HUD has 7 of them. It's what all your intakes, your annual assessments, your APRs, all of that feeds into. So every intake and assessment you do directly impacts how well the community at large does on performance, and then directly impacts how the community is scored. So you are all highly interconnected. the 10 bonus points, you can get 5 for leveraging housing stuff, and we'll get for it, and 5 for the healthcare, but it is for that overall application. So HUD is basically saying, we're looking for new projects to address these things. And if you do it, you're going to get a lot of extra points, which means that's how, when you're looking at the screen right now, you see tier 1 and tier 2. The projects that we're going to talk about that are in tier 2, like the new projects and people that fall out of what is eligible to be renewed automatically, those projects get funded when the whole community scores well. So that's what those 10 bonus points speak to. There's a separate group of points that we'll look at shortly, which is your individual project scoring. And so I don't want to conflate the two. So far, we've just been talking about the overall app, and that's hopefully answers your question there. And then later, we're going to talk about how some of these changes to get the points on the overall app meant we had to change our local scoring tools because you want to get in line. And so that is what has been done, but it's been done in the least invasive way possible, I think. And then another question that came in, do you need to be in Alameda County to apply for funds? Yes, you'd be in Alameda County, the geographic area, so Oakland, Berkeley, and anybody else in there. The money is coming directly into the county, what again is called the CoC. That's what HUD looks at. They call them continuums of care. In like big states, there'll be a few that are like major cities, and then there'll be something that like covers the rest of the state, for example. So Alameda has its own, San Francisco has its own, Contra Costa has its own, all those types of things. So hopefully that answers the questions, but keep putting them in the chat as they go. And then I'll pause in a little bit again. So what's available to you all? So HUD puts out what's called an ARD, an annual renewal demand. And Liz, I'm going to get to your question too, so bear with me. We are looking at an annual renewal demand of about 38 million. And what does that mean? So the ARD for short is essentially all the money that you were awarded last year is considered what's eligible to be renewed. So all the projects who already get funded are eligible to be renewed, and that's the total amount of all the projects that exist to be in Alameda County, that 38 million. If you're really curious, and it may be a useful tool, and we'll even have it in our folder that we're gonna give to you that like has everything online with resources, is called the GIW, the Grant Inventory Worksheet. That is a sheet that's public. You can literally Google HUD, CoC, GIW, Alameda County. You'll get there pretty quickly. You might have to hit a drop down, but that'll bring up something that says, here's the ARD, here's the community you're in, here's every project that is listed, here's every project's line item budget, here's every project's number of units they have. So there's a ton of really useful information, just so you know about your own projects, but also so you can know about what's going on in the rest of the community. So this year, I think in honor, I'm just gonna take a drink of water. This year, I think I really shouldn't say in honor of COVID, in response to COVID, HUD has basically said, look, we are gonna make all of the renewal projects, all that money basically guaranteed. So tier 1, normally in the past has not equaled the ARD. It's been like 97% of it. HUD basically always says in previous years, look, we're probably going to fund most of you again, but some of you are going to kind of straddle or be on the edge, and some of you are going to fall below. And falling below means into tier 2. So tier 1 is equivalent to the renewal amount. Right now, if we went and just apply with just renewal projects, barring something crazy happening with HUD or Congress, I always will say that, we would get all the projects renewed. But there is bonus funding available, and that means new projects can apply. And if a new project presented a highly competitive app, in theory, then maybe it could jump into tier 1, and that would push a renewal down. That's the case every year. This year, though, tier 1 folks and renewal projects are more safe than ever, but just explaining kind of that wrinkle. So tier 1, again, is that full amount for the renewals. Tier 2 is HUD says, you know, you can apply for new projects this year that will enter a national competition. So there's actually almost 2 million available to the county to get new projects. On top of that, HUD has also said, we're gonna do a domestic violence bonus again. So really wanna encourage projects, and I'll kind of dig into each of these in more detail, but we really wanna encourage projects who are serving people who are fleeing violence, human trafficking, stalking. There's kind of a wide range of things that fall into that, because while domestic violence doesn't normally fit nicely into HUD saying people have to be literal homeless, because that's usually has to be served here, people on the street in shelter, that's the main target for this money. But they realize people fleeing are in essence homeless, right? Because you can't stay and be stable in your home. So there's this other pot of money that is available. The last pot of money is CoC planning. It is not part of the competition. We like to put it out there so you can kind of see the full picture of the money that's available. But generally, the collaborative applicant applies for that, and it helps to pay for things around planning and doing this process and making sure that the system is set up to do coordinated entry and housing first and other things of that nature. So there's questions in the chat that I'm trying to think if I'm going to answer them. I think I probably will. So the first question in the chat too is, are past DV products part of the annual renewal demand or part of the DV bonus? So if there's been a DV product approved, and there is one here, you are now just part of the fold. You are now just part of the annual renewal demand, and you will be every year after. You're no longer, you're still very special in serving our DV population, but you're no longer carved out specially to get this separate pot of money. You're just in the ARD, which is the reason why that's so important. Is there's basically two ways to increase the money you can get from HUD. One is if rents keep going up, FMRs go up, and that means that people that get rental assistance and do PSH and rapid rehousing with that, that means you're going to get more per unit every year. FMR can go down, and in some places it has, and it often lags a year before. It lags a year before. Sorry, FMR is fair market rates. It's the amount that HUD says a one bedroom you can pay for X amount of money, and it's based on your geographic area and what's been going on there with rents. So there's specific FMRs for Alameda County. So that's one way you in theory can increase your money, but it's not guaranteed. The way that is guaranteed is if you win a tier 2 CoC bonus project, a new project, or DV bonus project, that next year it becomes part of the ARD. So let's say you got it all, you apply for it all. Instead of 38 million, you'd have 42 million next year, or just shy of it, right? And the next year you could have 46. This is the biggest way. So really consider if you're going to hit DV, folks, if you're a tribe or a new entity like that could apply. If you're doing a really good job with racial equity, doing some really interesting stuff with healthcare or housing that uses other funds, and I'm going to say more about all of that. But all of those things are things that Alameda, Everyone Home, the NOFO committee all want to get going in the community to support things that are already important in the community. But this is how you increase your funding year over year. Max is being responsive in the chat as people come up. DV housing does not require the chronically homeless definition. So basically HUD has 4 categories of homelessness, and then they have something called chronic homelessness, and now they also have something called dedicated plus. But basically for projects that, actually I think I'm going to hit it on a page. So I'm going to speak to what the person has to be eligible for in terms of homelessness, because I have another page that's going to show you what new projects you can apply for. But a quick note before I get into that, and then I'll jump to that. Thanks, Max, for answering. The system generally has a tier 1 and a tier 2. So as we said, most of the renewal projects, if not all, will fall into tier 1. If anything falls into tier 2, either a new project or a renewal project that didn't perform as well and got bumped by a new project, they go into tier 2. They're less likely to be funded. They enter into a national competition. It's a 100-point score. This is the box on the right. So it will first start off with how well did your CoC do as a whole. So when we're saying, like, if you get housing projects or ones that leverage healthcare and you can get those bonus 10 points, that's what we're talking about here. How did the whole CoC score? How well were you? How competitive were you? Then there's kind of a funky formula that HUD uses for where you fell into tier 2. So if you're first on the list or second. And then the final thing is, so that's 40 points. The CoC score is 50, your ranking is 40. And then if you're committed to doing housing first, which you should be if you're applying, you get 10 points there. So that's kind of the tier 1, tier 2. People are brought up kind of DV bonus as well, and where they kind of fit in. So DV bonus is also its own competition. So if you present a project, and this year, rather than having 50 million available, there is 102 million available across the country. So even more money available as DV advocates really pushed for it. So if a DV bonus project is put forward and HUD in the national competition says it did well and we're going to fund it, it gets moved out of the list wherever you put it. So if you decided that you wanted to, that it was being ranked in tier 1 because it did so well on the scoring tool, then it would just move out of tier 1 and everybody else would get moved up. If for some reason it was in tier 2, it would also get moved out of tier 2 and everyone would get moved up. So that CoC project ranking, everyone would get moved up. Now, for some reason, the DV bonus was ranked in tier 2 and doesn't win in the national competition, well, then it just joins tier 2 and is part of that national competition. There's like about 6 competitions going on. So doing our best to break it down, but hopefully that tiering piece made sense. And more coming in the chat. I think Max is providing some helpful resources on homeless definitions, and I'll kind of speak to that right here, and then I will pause and see if folks just have questions on anything. So when we're talking about CoC bonus, that generally we're speaking to new products that can be created. So that $1.9 million. So they can be brand new, and a new project could be created through that bonus money. They could be created through the DV bonus money. They could even be created through if somebody realized, you know what, I'm not spending all my money year over year. I'm going to volunteer reallocate so I can really serve my clients well, score better in the future. That money can get tossed into the mix. So you could have that 4 million between CoC and DV could even be even more if you have reallocation. So that new projects can use all of that money. Projects who are in a current project component type that want to switch to something else can transition. If it's something you're trying to do, it's not simple. It takes a year, and you'd really want to give us a heads up. And sometimes it may make more sense to kind of give back money and apply as a new project. But if that was something you were considering, like going from rapid rehousing to PSH, that is a kind of a process with details. And so I'd welcome you to talk to Homebase sooner than later on that if you're considering transitioning. Question in the chat too, if a project's going to add units but not ask for additional funds, is it an expansion project? It's an interesting one because you're not expanding the funds, but more than likely it would be considered an expansion. At the very least, you would have to seek a grant amendment with the local field office. You might just be able to do it that route. But if you are trying to add units, then probably would still be considered an expansion. But again, Homebase is here to kind of help walk through those things so we can speak to you about that, or have you kind of work with everyone home in the county to see about going through the field office if you're looking to add people. But expansion is one of these things you kind of are a good segue. So on the bottom of it is expansion. And so if you are currently running a project, and I'll just say you're currently running a project and you spend your money and you have good outcomes, then you're a good candidate for expansion. If you're always kind of leaving money on the table or not serving everyone, really do not apply, because you're just going to really kind of hurt the community and the scoring piece of it. But I will notice, like, if you've never served DV folks and you really want to, a rapid rehousing program could say have like 20 units, but you're like, you know what, I want 10 more to serve DV folks. You can expand and seek the DV bonus money for your expansion, assuming you're only going to use that money to serve people fleeing DV. So that's kind of the twist on expansion. You can also consolidate projects, and part of the, because people are asking when will this be open, things will be open today. We're even going to give you some start links that you can start looking at. And then by the end of the day, we'll kind of have it all in order. We're trying to get stuff on the website locally, and make sure we send an email to follow up so everyone's really clear on what the next steps are. But yeah, basically this is the launch of the application, and we'll show you the timeline, but you will have almost a month, about until October 8th to fill things out. I think that consolidation, and then I'll look at the last question. With consolidation, if you are a direct recipient, you can consolidate up to 10 renewal products into one. So 10 is a huge number. Usually it's like 4. So I don't know that you're going to need 10, but essentially, let's say you're a project and you've over the years have applied for like 4 different PSH projects, you have 4 different rapid rehousing projects. Maybe it's easier for you to manage them all under one. You just do one application, one APR, all of that jazz. Then you could consider consolidating, and we will be asking folks this in the application process if you're interested in taking that approach, because it kind of kicks some other things off that we need to do, but it is easier than in past years. If you're a question in the chat, if you're trying to consolidate, that's a good one. If you're trying to consolidate a TH and RRH project, would that be a new TH RRH project? So there's a concept years ago, you used to be able to just apply for transitional housing. That kind of went away, but everyone's still kind of grandfathered. So that's like 2 years intensive support services at a location that is temporary. HUD moved towards, this is like, I'm trying to think, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, something. HUD moved towards thinking that PSH was a better solution that was more cost effective and had better impacts. So it switched to like pushing a lot of these transitional housing programs to become permanent supportive housing programs. And then we have the other component of rapid rehousing, which is a 2-year grant. I may even have all this on the next, yeah. So the next slide talks about what like new projects could be. So you could do permanent supportive housing, which is basically long-term housing, voluntary services, but they can stay forever. Permanent housing, which is the rapid rehousing piece, is up to 24 months. That's like supporting people in subsidies with regular market rate landlords. The question in the chat is about transitioning to something called joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing. So in the past, this was only available to like DV programs or youth programs through YHTP, but now they've basically said we recognize this might be an effective model. So essentially, if you're running a joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing project, let's say you want to serve 10 people. You have to have 10 transitional housing slots and 10 rapid rehousing slots, because they're allowed to choose voluntarily, client choice, housing first, all of that good stuff. They're allowed to choose which component they want to be in. So all of your people could choose to be in transitional housing or rapid rehousing at any given time. You can't consolidate them. You can't consolidate a TH and an RRH, to get back to the question, because they're 2 different component types. So it doesn't just let you bridge them basically together. More than likely, you would have to try and transition over the course of a year, and it's kind of a pain in the butt, or you would basically be giving up the current funding and then applying for a new project as a TH RRH. So if that's something, again, you're considering, I'd say talk to us sooner than later, so we can make sure you're kind of going down the right path or making the decisions you have to make. But no, it's not as simple as I have a transitional housing program and I have a rapid rehousing program and I want to smush them together. It makes sense, but it's not permitted by HUD. Lori, this looks like it's directed at everyone home. If folks want to look at that in the chat, I'm gonna give you guys a second to look at that, and I'll just finish up this section and then see if anyone wants to respond. But this particular slide speaks to the bonus funding. So this is all the different projects you can do with bonus funding. HMIS and coordinated entry is not likely something any of you all will do, because it's normally done by the county, and it's kind of the coordinating pieces. So you're really looking at those top 3 options. I will say that if you're folks who have been doing this and have had trouble ramping up a project because you're trying to spend money in a year while also like staffing up and getting people into units, HUD has kind of created some runway, and they basically said we could give you an 18-month grant with 12 months of funding. So you'd have 6 months of ramp up, get your staffing, house people, and then you'd have kind of your regular year. So in that startup year, you can actually request a longer term, which would then end up being every 12 months. DV bonus this is what's available if you're applying for the DV funding. So you can't do permanent supportive housing, but you can still do the rapid rehousing and the joint transitional housing. The projects have to be at least, projects have to be at least 50 grand. And as I stated before, if you want to expand a product that didn't used to serve survivors, you can, as long as the new money is being used dedicated to that group of people. So before we do timeline, let's pause for some things in the chat. I know there is a question just generally to everyone home about doing an analysis for gaps in services. I will say that there's a lot of really great recent work done by everyone home around real system modeling, really looking at actually what is the inflow into the county of new homelessness and returns to homelessness, and what it actually takes in numbers and services and money to get people out. And that is also broken down with a real focus on racial equity. And so the short answer is yes, there is a lot of analysis being done on the county and what is needed. I can't say that necessarily like we have it broken down to like just CoC funds and like what subsidies and units we would need more in CoC funding, but you could probably figure it out based on what Everyone Home has done in their, I'm going to mess it up, it's Centering for Racial Equity, something like that plan. But and this is all online as well. So if you want more info there, we can get you more info on that, but there's a lot of work on modeling being done. Anything to add, Everyone Home, that capture?
Thanks, Aram. No, your response was spot on. And so the other thing I will add is that we're also working hand in hand with the county in regards to the Home Together plan and revising and looking at that systems modeling process that took place 2 years ago to ensure that we're updating and looking at what our needs are. But if you do go to our website, and we could also drop it in the chat, there is a very comprehensive report in regards to our overall needs. And then when determining the priorities for this NOFO, the leadership board, as well as the HUD COC board and the NOFO committee had an opportunity to look at priorities based on what our overall system needs. And that's reflected in this application.
Perfect. And Dorcas just put in the chat. It's really good. I'd really look at it. It's way deeper than a lot of communities go, and a lot of times we're like, well, what do we actually need? What are the numbers? It is at least, and it's not an easy thing to do, but it's at least an attempt to model actually what's going to be needed, and particularly to support folks that are overrepresented by race in the homeless population. A couple other questions. Expansion HMIS project, would that get 10-point bonus? Riley, you might have to say more. Are you talking about like healthcare or housing, or did something come up on the slide? But generally the new projects are going to be housing related.
I
You
thought,
want to add anything, Riley? Yeah, go ahead.
I thought I saw something in there that said if you put in a HMIS, you got a 10-point in for that particular project in a previous.
Oh, yes.
Not the 10 points application.
Yeah, I found it. Bottom right on the slides here, basically what it's saying is that it's not the same housing first commitment they're dealing with. They're just going to get those points. It's kind of a separate thing. So the HMIS or CE products would get the 10 points in that if the expansion fell to tier 2, you get up to 50 points related on the score of the CoC, up to 40 points on where they were ranked as a project, and then you'd get this 10 points of housing first. My understanding is you just get the 10 points for the housing first, unless you have a different understanding, Riley.
Oh, thank you. That's what I thought.
Perfect. Paul, again, how would you consolidate if you have 2 CoC grants with different grant periods? All this is well addressed by HUD. It basically is that when you have a grant expiring earlier, it's going to start off of that one. And I have some actually pretty detailed instructions. So HUD puts out a lot of information. It used to be there was very little, and Homebase had a lot more work and materials to create. HUD has actually done a lot of work recently to get things in order. So they provide a couple things. One, the NOFO itself will speak to consolidation generally, but also, and all this stuff is going to be in the handbook that we share with you that's online and web-based, so you can go find. But essentially, there is a document called the Renewal Project Detailed Instructions, and then there is also one called the Renewal Projects Navigational Guide, which has to do with eSnaps. If you're not familiar with eSnaps, it's the online portal that HUD uses so that you can actually apply to them, because you have to put something into a program for them in addition to this local competition. So those 2 guides spell all of this out. And it's actually easier than in past years, because it used to be in past years you needed like 1 renewal project, app and the other renewal project app, and then a third app that was like a consolidation of those things. Same with expansion. They've done away with all that. You don't need to do these extra apps, but there are some things you have to like check off to make sure like they know which grant's going to survive, and there's like PIN numbers and stuff. So there's lots of guidance on this. Happy to share more, but essentially it'll go out. They'll be looking at the one that expires first and aligning it with that. Okay, I think I made it through those questions. Let me just see how we're doing on time. I think we're okay. So I want to speak. We're going to start kind of shifting gears into kind of specifics to the local competition in Alameda. A lot of this is kind of in broader like HUD stuff and the HUD rules. Now it's going to be what really applies to you as a new or renewal project applying. So this is a timeline. All of this will be available as well. But essentially you have through the 8th to fill out the application materials that we're going to share with you in a little bit and demo for you. But basically, instead of doing paper applications, Homebase has a system called Presto that you go online and you fill in answers, really easy to use, but it takes away kind of the submitting the paper forms and having lots of different narrative docs. So you'll fill out information in Presto. If you're a renewal project, you've already been working with us and submitting APRs. So we basically take the APR data that's against your objective measures and the new questions we ask you. We put that all together, and you'll see that Presto will then be able to produce something that allows the rating and ranking committee, which is our NOFO committee, to actually score you and review your applications. And then there's some miscellaneous forms we ask, not miscellaneous, but other things that the scoring tools require. And so there'll be a folder where you can just basically upload them again, rather than having to email. You'll just be, but all that'll come shortly. The big date though is October 8th. Then on the 22nd, things will be released to you, and then it kicks off a couple-day appeal period. And then a couple days later that it'll be released. And then eventually everything has to be submitted to HUD by the 16th, but actually I'm trying to update and edit those dates to be a little bit earlier. So we're going to try and submit probably a couple days earlier, but we have to have everything in place because HUD has kind of these background deadlines that I didn't share in this presentation because I think it's more confusing, but HUD has some other things. If you're like, well, why these dates? It's because we're backing into all this stuff. Like certain things has to be into the community, certain things that have to be sent to who gets funded or not by a certain date. So all of these basically are backed out from those dates. So before we get into scoring, any questions on timeline? Feel free to raise hand. You can probably come off mute. So what's about to follow is I'm not going to go through the scoring criteria like step by step because a lot of it is unchanged since 2019. And so we're really going to point out the things that are being changed based on what HUD said in its announcement. So every time we get a NOFO, that's really HUD saying, here's everything you need to know about applying for this grant. Here's what we think is important. Here's how you're going to get scored on the things that we think are important. So why we propose these changes and work with the NOFO committee to get them approved is solely because we want to have the most competitive application that we can. And if we don't make these changes, we're going to lose a lot of points that are easily accessible to us. The other big piece that always in the background of this is that what HUD is pushing forward, I think is equally important to Alameda County and from working with you all. So when it says like we want to incorporate racial equity and people are promoting it, we want to make sure that we're including the voices of people with lived experience. We want to make sure we're tapping into our healthcare partners. I mean, the good thing is you're already well positioned compared to many other cities or more rural communities or things like that. You're well positioned. So that's why we're proposing these changes. For renewal projects, tried to do things as least invasive as possible because you already had your year that you're going to get scored on. But for new products, we had a little bit more room because we're just announcing to them now if you're a new product. So the reason the changes are being suggested is because of this. So I'm going to go through basically what HUD has said. If you do these things, you will get more points. And again, the reason we want more points is that's how you get new funding. The higher you score, the better your tier 2 funded are, the better your DV bonus funded. That's why it's so important to get it. You're really trying to beat the nation's median score to get more funding. So there's like 7, I want to say, this slide and another, things that HUD said. So HUD has basically said, we want your projects. Thank you, Paul. That's a great question. So this scoring is for the whole CoC, correct? So everything on this slide and the next slide, yes, is about that larger national thing that the whole CoC applies for all together. It is not your individual project apps. It's for the whole community, and all these point values are what you can get on that larger app. So this app is like out of 200. Last year, I'm drawing a blank, but maybe the median was like 151 or something. And so if you could get 4 to 8 points, I mean, all of a sudden you're at 150, you're at 158, you're at 170. So you're shooting up by getting these points. But these more points you get here means the more likely those products we score locally get funded that are new. So, but that's a great point of clarification. So first, HUD wants to see that communities are using objective criteria. So you state something and you say you can measure against it. So people are gonna support people with increased placements into housing. It's objective. The scoring tools are pretty good about being objective. And the other piece that kind of plays into it is system performance. And that's what I was saying before, is HUD has 7 system performance measures. They're looking at increasing participant income, housing stability, returns to homelessness, length of time homelessness, access to benefits, and I'm missing a couple. But essentially they want to see that you're using the tools to measure these things. So we were pretty close. I think added in something you'll see in the changes. So after I go through this stuff, I'm going to show you what was actually changed, but this is kind of the rationale. So renewal products were okay. New products, I think we just added in a little bit on for one of them, but really well positioned. The rest of them is where we did most of the work. So they want to make sure, HUD wants to make sure that if you have a DV project, and so this is where sometimes a specific type of project could get called out. And when the question before came up about like, are victim service providers part of like the annual renewal demand, are they still part of bonus? Well, we're taking this question to mean they're still looking at victim service providers, whether they're renewal or new. But what they want to know is, how are you able to assess a product's ability to improve safety criteria? So we'll see, we've added some things into renewal and new tools to address that. We're also supposed to score projects on whether they consider the severity of barriers experienced by participants. So there's language added in there. And additionally, a big one to deal with racial equity, scoring products based on how projects identify barriers to those barriers to participation faced by persons of different races and ethnicities, especially those overrepresented in the local homeless population. And it's taken or will take steps to eliminate those barriers. So this is one that's really to promote racial equity and make sure products are being assessed on this. I know this was important to Alameda, important to everyone home in the NOFO committee. So there's language related to that I will show you shortly. And then the last two deal with some of the other things we've kind of been talking around, which is they want new projects that use non-CoC money or that leverage healthcare. So if you submit one project, new project, so if anybody in the community submits a new project that does this, the whole community benefits. And that's kind of why we're all tied together in many ways here. So if a project puts forth a new project that is going to do housing, but they're able to get non-CoC funding, and that would be for like rental assistance or leasing. So essentially, like I want to do a permanent supportive housing project, let's say, and I'm going to have, I think I want to do 100 units. If I can get at least 25 of those units funded by something outside of the CoC and technically ESG as well, but basically outside those core HUD homeless funding sources. So it could be local dollars, state dollars, it could be HOPWA, it could be other things like that are coming into the community or that you're able to access. But if you're able to show and prove that 25% of the units are coming from that alternate source, then you'll get the full 5 points. If you're doing like 15 or 10 or 20, it's still good and we'll still get credit. We'll still get credit if you do less than 25%, but we won't get the maximum full points. Riley, I'll answer your question in 1 second too. The other piece is that new projects put forth that leverages healthcare resources. There's a real emphasis on supporting people with mental health, substance abuse, particularly. So what they're looking for is if you apply for a new project and you're able to supply a written commitment, an MOU, memorandum of understanding from a healthcare organization that you're going to work with, that can state, that healthcare organization would state, we're going to provide substance abuse treatment to anyone who's in. Word, it's not to say you do this for everyone. It's people, it's housing first, it's participant choice. But if someone says I need help, then you have a core organization attached to you that you have an agreement with to provide those services. Alternatively, if the program itself is going to fund services in equal value to 25% of all the money being, so say you ask for 100 grand, you're going to throw another 25% of that, another 25 grand at that in services. If you do either of those things and we can document that you're doing those things through budget or those written commitments, then that's where the bonus points come in. Riley had asked something about, do you need to be in tier 1 to get the bonus points? You do not. You just need to put forth a project that is new and that meets this criteria, and then you can get the points, is my understanding of it. So no, it doesn't matter whether it's in tier 1 or tier 2. To that point, even if it's in tier 2, reason to apply with this because it'll bump the overall application up and then make tier 2 more competitive. So it's kind of how it all are interconnected. Okay. One other question: how much detail is required in the MOU? Essentially, it's going to have to make a clear statement that the place has the ability to provide. So if you're doing the substance use treatment one, the first bullet on the bottom, you'd have to have something with an organization so that they have the capacity to meet the needs of the number of people you intend on referring. So if you're serving 20 people and you want to be prepared, I think they would need to be able to say we could provide weekly or monthly or some ongoing outpatient or inpatient programming. And we could speak more to this. I think Homebase is working on internally just to support all our communities, potentially on some template MOUs. So we may be able to provide that in the future. Let me just see what else is coming in. Service delivery method, Paul. I'm not sure there's a ton of specifics, but I think the key component is just being able to support that. It's probably housing first, it's voluntarily choice, and then it kind of meets this criteria. Services is really broad. They're just really trying to open the door to basically say, we oftentimes provide like permanent supportive housing, but then we'll have like one staff person to like the 50 to 100 people we have, right? I think the idea is to say people to stay in housing and then move on, even from PSH, need additional support. So that's really what they're looking at there, but happy to speak more in detail offline. Do you have to have existing sites to qualify for this funding? No, you probably shouldn't. You cannot lease your own stuff. You generally can't use your own money to pay for stuff you already have. So this would be like you're getting leasing dollars or rental assistance dollars. These are specific terms HUD uses based on old programming that got merged. So there's still kind of two distinct concepts, but essentially you can set up arrangements where either you are going to pay a landlord directly on behalf of a client who's also going to pay some rent, like in a rapid rehousing program, or you're going to go to somebody who owns a property and say, I want to lease all your units in your building, or I want to lease 20 and I'm going to pay you directly. That's basically how you would do it. So it's a good thing to have identified sites that you would use, but to have them already is not really an issue. So hopefully that clears that up. Okay, we're going to look at scoring, of course, Earl. We're going to look at scoring, and sorry if it seems like I'm randomly talking to someone, but I'm just looking at the chat as it comes up and keeping it open to try and stay on it. So jump in if you don't understand a question. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to bring up the scoring tool so people can see what it is we're talking about when we're talking about those changes. Okay, So like I said before, I'm not going to necessarily go through every distinct line because this hasn't changed unless we're highlighting it to you from the previous years. Recognizing that some people may be new, I'll kind of skim like the topic areas. All of these documents also going to be available to you, and later you're in probably the next hour, you're going to get a link to where you can see all this stuff, and then we'll follow up later. But all of this is in a folder, so you can review it. So don't worry about screenshots or memorizing it. And we're going to leave all the yellow in for now. The yellow shows all the changes. Eventually, we'll update that, but for now, it shows you what is being changed. Okay. So the scoring, this is for brand new projects. So this would be somebody who's never applied before, or maybe you have another CoC grant, but you're looking to do something new, or you're looking to expand. So there are points related to the type of project you're proposing. There's kind of a community preference towards PSH expansions versus other things. There are points for addressing local and HUD priorities, and that's what this section here comes to. And one of those is racial equity. So the yellow text is a brand new, this has not existed on its own, and is a brand new factor. And it's basically saying that new products have to provide a narrative to explain their efforts to identify and remove any barriers to participation faced by persons of different races and ethnicities. And we speak to efforts that you might use to cite as examples in here. I think I'm missing a footnote, but what we're going to add is, Max or Esther, just jot this for me. What we're going to add to is that in the Everyone Home reporting is that it's been identified. We're going to link to the report so folks can see who is overrepresented, so you have a better understanding. But generally, Black African Americans and Native American Indigenous folks are way overrepresented compared to their representation in the national population. Obviously, it's kind of the homeless system often is the place where if no other system figured it out or other systems kind of mess with people's lives, they end up here, right? So that just disproportionately affects folks. So that's kind of the idea in the racial equity piece. And I'll pause after I go through, but just let me know if you have questions. The other piece is to add, and I will say we're not changing the total score or anything in any of these docs, right? We're kind of working mainly within existing criteria or moving things around a little. But this one is to incorporate lived experience. So one of HUD's priorities is they want to make sure that the folks with lived experience have a voice in the process, which makes sense not just for scoring overall, but for our purposes here. Project will provide a narrative explaining their efforts to include people with lived experience. Their HUD is really looking at past 7 years and specifically hoping to hear from unsheltered folks as we see kind of COVID crisis and people vulnerable on the street. So that's going to be something new projects will have to address. All of this will be part of that Presto system I've alluded to. It's not going to be on a form. You'll put it in a closer to something that's like a Survey Monkey. Today, I got an email saying they just changed their name to like Momentive or something. So I'll have to try and figure that out. Benchmark performance, the reason that's highlighted there, that 6 points is just, we took 3 points from there. It used to have 9. We took 3 points to carve out that previous one so that we would be able to emphasize those new priorities. For budget and cost effectiveness in 4A, this is where that stuff about using non-CoC funds or using healthcare. So this is where the budget and cost effectiveness will get these factors included in considering how to score. So there's 4 points available. And if you show you're using non-CoC funded dollars or leveraging healthcare, you can get money there. Other stuff in here is just like your invoicing ability, how you've used your units, what capacity you have, how you manage your fiscal piece. And then we get to capacity to serve population. And there again, it was another opportunity to say something about leveraging healthcare and the services piece as your capacity to serve the population. Liz, don't let me forget. I think you have a question, but I'll come back. Quality assurance. This speaks to where we were able to, and this probably is worth looking at in the long run. But again, part of what we were considering is like, we didn't want to change the whole tool kind of like at the last minute here with a lot of these things, but it's worth looking at in the new year as well. if any of these should be reconsidered. And Alameda tries to have like community input sessions and periods when stuff comes out. And so we will continue to leverage those in the future. But for this one, essentially trying to add, and I think we did something similar in renewal, but essentially trying to make sure that we hear, it needs to be objective, that we hear that clients are feeling safer in DV projects. And so what we're saying is that if that a program to be able to say they're doing their quality assurance to the highest level, is that a victim service provider would have to show that feedback received during safety planning or through surveys is taken into consideration. And so when they're doing safety planning or surveying folks, they should be getting kind of objective material, objective communication from the client stating whether or not they're feeling safer or not. And then likewise at the bottom, making sure that victim service provider trainings are specifically, although I'm sure they are already, but specifically, and we want to put it in our tool, that the trainings must include resources for including client safety. So Liz asking, what about DVCES projects? So DVCE are not, CE products are not ranked in this competition like they're like the rest are. So you're not really being assessed for that here. It's something that I would say is something to be looking at in years to come. A lot of communities regularly rank their HMIS and coordinated entry projects like at the bottom of tier 1, just to hold on to them, but not to bump other projects. But it would be something to consider in future years, whether you want to have a better evaluation tool for actually ranking coordinated entry projects and having them fall within the system. And if you go that route, then you would look at adding in language at that point, Liz.
So, Aram,
yeah.
at the top where you said new projects, so we were planning to flesh out, or either have a new project or flesh out our existing one to really create a robust domestic violence coordinated entry, which includes services. And it just seems like by that top box, it isn't eligible, like you aren't.
By top box?
Yeah. Like it says DV, rapid rehousing or joint, it doesn't have a box for what we're thinking.
So this is, again, I got to go look potentially at your policy, which is also going to be included. But coordinated entry projects are basically assessed outside of this process. And so I think the community has just natural ranking for how it like automatically places coordinated entry and HMIS projects. And so the tools themselves don't contemplate scoring you all at this point. So we can definitely speak more, and we'll go.
So
we can
but
look back.
But you're still saying it's an eligible project. It's just not. You just can't measure the. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Right now, the community does not measure its HMIS and CE projects, and that's what I was saying. Maybe in the future, and that's not unusual. That's like, I work in San Francisco, other places they do the same thing, but it's something to consider. Especially if you are seeing more opportunities to coordinate entry products where you have multiple ones. But yes, absolutely permitted. You can apply for one new coordinate entry DV project for a minimum of 50 grand. Paul, we do a biannual consumer survey. Does this need to change? So if you were setting up a new project, you would want to be sure, and I'll speak to renewal in a second. If you were setting up a new product that served DV folks, you would want to make sure that this piece is included in your survey. But with that, potentially you're talking about renewals, and I can move to the renewal document. So I'm going to stop sharing that one and bring up renewal. I think this will answer your question, but let's look at it. Okay. So for renewal projects, basic threshold stuff, have to participate in coordinated entry, have to be low barrier, housing first, and have to do a client eligibility process that is aligned with coordinated entry. So in essence, it continues to be aligned with coordinated entry referrals and how to take folks. So folks probably know that a lot of the tool, and it's a good thing because it's what HUD wants to, but should be objective and focused on system performance measures. So you have a section 1 called performance outcomes. I'm mostly just going to gloss through it because it has a separate section for like PSH, rapid rehousing, different components. And then you're measured on a scale about exits to permanent housing, maintaining or increasing income, cash benefits. This is all for your participants, right? Who's exiting to homelessness, capacity, unit capacity, and utilization. So the same thing. Now we go into rapid rehousing. That one was all for permanent supportive housing. So half the scoring, 48 points, is just on performance. We're not messing with that. All of that's being pulled from your APRs that you've already given us. So that's all of this too. This is just performance, all judged on APR. So next piece is port and entry and serving highest needs population. So what was being balanced here is that we wanted to make a real commitment to racial equity, but we also know renewal projects were told you're not really going to get scored on anything and be blindsided by it, but we do need to have it in the tool in order to show HUD that it's something that we take seriously and we take seriously with our renewal projects. So what this is going to be is a narrative opportunity to speak to something that already kind of existed, right? So at the bottom, you're supposed to describe any affirmative steps your project has taken to make enrollment as simple as quick as possible, especially for high need participants. Anything not in yellow, if I didn't say it before, is already text that exists in your tool that from the previous year that the NOFO committee reapproved. It's the yellow that's new. And so by adding in this yellow, while it should probably be stronger in future years, at least for this year, one of the factors to consider when a scorer is looking at this narrative is whether or not race and ethnicity was taken into account in determining barriers people might see. So renewals, you'll be asked to speak to that in the work that you're doing, how you're doing that piece. The other one, which is I think is Paul's question. Let me just see if it was right. So other stuff on here, how good is your HMIS data? Are you being audited and being clean with your audits? And then quality assurance. So this is where we put it again, because we had to find a place we could put something objective in about client safety. So if you are serving victims and are a victim service provider, then your surveys ideally would be taking into account the safety of your clients. So because this is brand new this year, we wanted to acknowledge, and we spoke with one of the main DV providers, that consumer surveys or through the regular safety planning process that victim service providers go through, starting I think with port and entry and into when the person is placed. So this would be something that's directly addressed towards victim service providers. You wouldn't necessarily have to address your survey unless, or redo your survey unless you're not doing this safety planning piece, or if you are not serving DV folks, then you don't have to change it. So that's it for the renewal piece. We added the staff training part too for victim service providers. So renewal for everyone who's on the call, who's trying to just get their money again for the next year. Those are the two changes, and one of them applies to victim service folks, and we've kind of vetted it with them. And then the other applies to the racial equity piece. So be sure to speak to that when you're asked a question about this in Presto, which we will show you soon. So, of course, Paul, yeah. Really good questions. I'm going to go back to the other slideshow, I think. But I will pause again to see if anybody has questions on how you're going to be scored. All of this will again be very much available to you. Okay. So I think, Max, you're going to take over. We're going to go into, so the next piece that we're going to bring you into is kind of like that stuff about like how to apply, because it's a little different. And if you're a renewal, it's definitely different from what you did and new. It's probably very brand new. Hopefully the long and short is that it should be, as people get comfortable with it, an easier process, a more hopefully transparent process, a clearer process, one that doesn't require you to do a lot of math that you used to have to do. This system will do all of that. Will do all of that stuff. So let me Max, are you up and sharing? Are you good to go, or you want me to push through on this?
I am up and sharing. Sorry, I thought you wanted me to take over. Do you want to continue sharing?
Yep. No, jump in. I want to introduce Max. He's already, well, you met him at the up at the top, but Max is kind of our guru review and rank person. So gonna give it to him to explain what it will look like in Alameda.
Thanks, Aram. All right, as Aram said, we are working hard with everyone home to really try to streamline this process, try to make things a little less burdensome. I know we've covered a lot of materials, so I'm going to try to keep this as clear and concise as possible, and try to explain to you exactly the process you're going to go through to lodge your local application. I want to make sure that we're keeping distinct the different requirements for applications. You have two distinct application processes. Of course, you've got your HUD application, which is lodged through eSnaps. But right now we are talking about your local application to apply to find your rank in the priority listing. So first, I'm going to talk to you about the Box folder. Box is a cloud server that we use to solicit your application materials. There's a number of required attachments. I'll go through those. Some of them actually use template forms that we've already produced, and you'll have those available for download also through Box, which brings me to the second point here under the check mark, which is, I'm sorry, let me, I've already switched these up for myself and confused myself. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is where to find the application materials, your checklist, your templates, and so forth. It'll explain exactly what needs to be submitted, and then into the separate Box folder, which is unique to, you will have one folder for each of your projects, and that's where you'll actually deposit the completed templates and required policies and procedures, things of that nature. Then I'll talk a little bit about Presto. Presto, as mentioned a couple of times already, is an online web format that we run at home base, specifically for NOFO local competition purposes. And it is consists of a couple different things. From your perspective, you're basically faced with a questionnaire, and then as well as a report that actually aggregates all of your project level data, if applicable, along with the narratives that you've submitted in the questionnaire. So first up, the public Box folder. So as I said, this is going to be your resource for all of the requirements to fulfill the local application. So up top, we have a couple of placeholders in here because some of these things do not yet exist, like the recording of the meeting that we're actually in right now. So you'll see that labeled as 00 when you first get in there, and as well as a placeholder for the follow-up email instructions. We're going to send those out, obviously, as an email to the entire listserv. Everyone who's present today will be included on that listserv, but this is going to be here just in case there are other folks who either were not hit by the listserv nor made it to today's meeting. We want to be sure that we're as open and transparent to all folks as possible. In addition, you'll also find a number of other materials, including the timeline for the local competition, the review and ranking process document, basically your local rules for review and rank, as well as the project scoring criteria for new project applicants and renewal project applicants. Both of those are labeled 04 to try to keep a little bit of parity as people sort of branch out into different concerns. 05 is going to be your required competition application and documents. So 05, I want to highlight that one. Probably really important to make sure you pay attention to 05. That's basically your checklist. It's your laundry list of all the different things that are going to need to be submitted into your project Box folder, which I'll show in just a second here. Finally, the match letter template is exactly what it sounds like. It's a template that allows us to collect information about where you are sourcing the matching funds for your project. Again, that's 25% of your proposed grant amount. And then lastly, we've got the GIW for Alameda. This is a publicly available document on HUD's websites, but just for your convenience, we've also thrown it in here. You are probably going to need to reference it a number of times as you go through. If you're a renewal project, I should say, there's information in there about the renewal amount of your grant, and we thought it would be handy for you to just have a convenient place to find that. I am not keeping an eye on the chat, but I do want to make sure Aram has beat me to the punch. We've got a number of links going up in the chat right now. And of course, these are going to be followed up again in the email, as well as in the 01 bidders follow-up email instructions. But serially going through here, the public box folder is the one where you're going to find all the materials that we're looking at right now. Presto has its own home on the web, prestoevals.org. That's where you're going to log in to fill out your questionnaire. And the contact sign-up form is in there again. And then, of course, our TA handbook, which coaches you through a number of particulars, especially with dealing with the HUD application on eSnaps. All right. Next up, again, just want to be clear, we've got two distinct concerns that we're dealing with in Box. What I just talked to you about was the place where you're actually going to retrieve all your materials, blank versions of templates and checklists and so forth. Now I'm going to talk to you about the Box folder where you actually upload your completed versions of those documents, along with other things like your policies and procedures that you're incorporating by reference in your Presto narratives. So in order to get access to your project's Box folder, please send us an email, alameda@homebaseccc.org. We need the first and last and the email address of any person who needs access to be able to upload attachments on behalf of your agency for a given project. So we do enable uploads per agency. So you only need request that this person have access to the agency as a whole. You don't need to necessarily state the projects that this person will have access to. When we go through that process, basically we sign up your email address, you receive a separate link from Box that says Homebase has enabled your access to this folder. You'll be given the ability to upload and modify documents and even delete them. So if you find you've uploaded the incorrect document, you can delete it and replace it with a different one. To Paul's question, you can request as many IDs as you need. So if you have a particularly large agency, don't hesitate to just shoot us an email with a long list of names and emails. We'll be happy to add as many people as you need to get this across the finish line. All right, I'm going to pause here for just a sec because I'm about to go into the Presto demo. And I just want to be sure that we're 100% crystal clear on our use of Box in the local competition. Okay, I'll keep an eye on chat. If anything else comes up, I'll be happy to answer it. Now we're going to move on to a Presto demo. So now, when you first log on to prestoevals.org, you're going to see a relatively familiar looking prompt. It's going to ask you for your email address and a password. Similar to the way that you are requesting access for Box, we also need you to request access for Presto. So similarly, just shoot us an email, first name, last name, and the email address of any person who needs access. We'll then set you up with a default password, which you will then be immediately prompted to change after your first login. Pretty straightforward. Anyone who's filled out a web form in the past, if you've ever taken a SurveyMonkey, for instance, you will be able to use Presto. This is a pretty straightforward platform from where you're sitting. So once you log in, the very first thing you're going to see is a screen that looks just like this. This would have all of your projects listed out. If you're applying for a renewal project and a new project, you will see both of them listed on this exact same screen. This is sorted out by agency, so you will be restricted to just seeing the projects that are within your agency, the applications in your portfolio for this year's NOFO. For now, the only button that you're going to see, you'll see it actually says available actions over here. The only action available to you currently, we're trying to keep this a little bit simple for you as we first roll it out, is type your answers. That's how you access the questionnaire. So when you click on type your answers, it's going to take you to a supplemental questionnaire, and it looks something like this. Now, I do want to point out that the questions are different depending on whether you're looking at a new project or a renewal project. But beyond that, pretty straightforward. You're going to march down on through these questions. Some of them are very brief. They'll just ask yes or no prompts. Others may ask you, in fact, here, question 3, you can see that this one is asking you to incorporate something by reference. So if you've updated your policies, your housing first policies since the 2019 local competition, of course, the last time we had a NOFA, then we are asking you to upload those to the project's box attachments folder. These required attachments are mentioned in the checklist that I alluded to earlier, but we're just trying to tag it in a second place here just so we can be sure we don't accidentally overlook anything. And some of the questions will call for a longer narrative. For instance, if we take a look at question 12 here, you'll see that if you have any data available regarding the time it takes from referral to enrollment and move-in, then we're asking you to also attach that information. And when you're attaching information that is pursuant to a narrative, always helpful if you can somehow incorporate by reference for the sake of your panel. Tell them, look at page 12, middle of paragraph 3 or something like that, to see the evidence that I'm putting forth in support of the narrative that I'm typing here. So, and that is about it for now. Within the coming days, we're going to open up your project reports. So you'll see a new button appear just about here that says view report. It'll be a sort of a lighter blue shade. That's the one that you're going to click on then to see, as I described, a project report that actually displays all of your project level data alongside the narratives that you have submitted in a clean format, all in one place. And it'll also have links embedded so that the panel can review the narratives, adjust your pre-scores, and also find their way to any attachment materials that might be related to the things that they're looking at. I do want to point out also that when you view your report as a project, you will see your pre-scores associated, especially for renewals. You'll see pre-scores associated with your data outcomes, and pursuant to your local process, the panel is given the ability to adjust your scores based on context narratives that you provide in the questionnaire. So, all right, I think that about wraps the Presto demo. And I'm keeping an eye on chat. Yes, thank you, Aram. Aram is just clarifying that based on scales that you already have designed in your scoring criteria, there are point values associated with different levels of performance, particularly on things like system performance measures, right? We're talking about housing stability or income or benefits measures. Those are objective criteria that already have point values associated to percentages of your clientele who are succeeding on those particular measures. And we can generate pre-scores based on that information, much of which is pulled from your APRs, some of which will be pulled from calls for narrative in the supplemental questionnaire, especially where we're looking for data that is not available in the APR. Let me know if that's clear. If I'm failing to get through, I'm happy to be told that I'm confusing everyone too. I'm more than happy to try to clarify or rephrase as needed.
So this is Aaron from Homebase. Thanks, Max. I think, and the next tool that we're going to show you in a minute might help. So I know there's a few things to be keeping in mind. Essentially for this local competition, you're going to fill out Presto like Max said, and you're going to submit these documents that's on that checklist that are often flagged within Presto. So that's kind of like just to kind of back out is the whole picture. You're going to answer these questions. The questions in Presto are basically so that we can score you. So they're directly related to the things in the scoring tool. So if you're like, why am I being asked this? you will be able to tie it back to something in the scoring criteria that we showed. Anything we can't get from an APR, an annual progress report, something that like actually has the data of like X person had 0 income when they came in and now they have more. All that stuff is coming from APRs and it just gets pumped into Presto. So you don't have to do any of the adding up or math. Presto will do all of that piece. The thing we haven't talked about a ton is eSnaps and HUD. HUD requires you, as part of this larger application that the applicant has to submit, HUD requires you to also fill in eSnaps. If you're renewal, you should kind of know this game. For the most part, you're allowed to just submit with making very little changes. So you don't have to go back and change all your stuff. And now it's even going to be 2 years old. Mainly, you're just going to have to go in and manually change like how much you're doing for match. Maybe at this point, Max, if there's no other questions, we can like move the slide again and I can just speak to the handbook. But we can speak, I can speak to some resources. But the other piece in order to complete this whole process is you have to use eSnaps and you have to fill this out, and new projects have to do the same. Just encourage, if you're new, to get in touch with us sooner, request stuff, let us know that you're going to apply for something new and we'll help you down this path. But there's also a really good resource that we have called our TA handbook. It used to be a big paper document. Now it is online. Esther is putting the information into the chat, and I'm just going to share the slides real quick again as well. So this is a TA, stands for Technical Assistance Handbook. This is going to be super useful to you for this other HUD piece that you just have to be doing alongside and filling it out. Again, for renewals, you barely have to do anything. You just have to kind of update some stuff, and the handbook will help direct you to that. But other things that will really highlight is if you're not familiar or you're newer, or even if you're doing a renewal or new, big things that come up for people is like the budget stuff, and what I can spend money on and what I have to match myself. So the handbook will help outline what are eligible costs, and that GIW that we mentioned kind of shows also like the different line items. But essentially, you can apply for housing dollars and leasing or rental assistance. You can ask for supportive services. If you lease units, you can ask for operating costs and you can ask for admin costs. So it's pretty limited to that. All of that's laid out with what you can ask for. Again, if you're a renewal, you're just asking for the same thing you did before, and you will automatically get FMR changes that go into effect. Match, if that's a new concept for you, every project that is funded through the CoC competition is required to have a 25% match. There are some exceptions, but basically if you are applying for 80 grand, you need to add 20K to the mix, right? So 20,000 is 25% of 80. So if you apply 80, they want to see you're bringing something to the table. It's not unusual. Sometimes some other programs require 100% match, so dollar for dollar. This is more 1 to 4. The only exception is if you have leasing dollars, they don't require you to match that. So that can be a big difference. eSnaps also has some other funky things about setting up a profile, getting certain numbers and registrations and forms filled out that HUD requires. All of that is in there. So if you forget like how to do any of these things in your renewal, go to the TA handbook. It'll point you where to go. It'll tell you where all the HUD references are and that piece. And again, if you're new and this is all just overwhelming, just start emailing us sooner than later, and then we can start working with you. That's one of the places Homebase will have a role. We'll do our best. If you email us at Alameda, to respond to you within the day, hopefully even within a couple hours, but sometimes depending on things changes. And then if we need to, we can certainly get on the phone or Zoom to handle any of those things. So we have some time left if there are questions for any of us at Homebase. Questions in the chat. Let's see. What about non-HMIS manual scoring for Presto? Julian, I might have you say more. Either type in or jump off chat just about your question. I'm not sure I totally understand it. The scoring for Presto. Feel free to come off mute or type more.
Yeah, sure. We have a collaborative grant with HCD that's between multiple agencies, 3 in HMIS and 3 that are not. So we do manual scoring, and was just wondering what that looks like with some agencies in HMIS and some not.
Okay, may have to talk about it more offline. I assume right now we've asked that you're renewing and that we've asked you all for your APR data. So hopefully any data for your program is being captured into the APRs that were submitted. If not, that is probably more complicated. Everybody has to use HMIS. It's a requirement of getting this money, and you may be a subcontractor, so you may have worked out a system where you give it to somebody else who puts it in, but ultimately somebody has to be putting it in, and we're using the APRs. So
Aram,
anything about, yeah.
I'm sorry, Aram, this collaborative has some DV providers and some non-DV providers. So the non-DV providers use HMIS. The DV providers use comparable HMIS systems. So when we—
That can produce an APR though, right?
Yes, but we couldn't combine it into a single APR as requested by you. So we sent in individual ones too.
Okay.
Wait, we can talk more about this offline.
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll get that figured. I imagine you may have been already communicating with Esther or Max about some of this stuff. So, but thank you for the DV context, because that's helpful. But essentially what we're hoping to get is data from each of the pieces, and that we can fold in, that goes into Presto. And so Presto can assess if it's in an APR format. And then anything we can't get out of an APR, we ask narrative questions for. So, but let's.
And it sounds like just anything, if we have questions or issues, we can just reach out to you guys for support, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
And if it's something historical we don't know as much about, we'll bug everyone home, or we'll bug Riley or somebody if we don't know as much about it. But generally, I think we're a good starting place. Paul, you're asking separate emails for Box and Presto access. I mean, if you can get your ducks in a row and send one email that says, I want all these people to have this access, that's easiest for us. And we know it's a pain for you to have to reach out and do this, but we can't just, if we just give you all links, that means anybody can open the links anywhere doing anything. So this is why we're basically asking you to request it, so they're assigned directly to emails that you have there. And then that'll let you into all those systems. So. Any other, of course, Paul, good questions today, Paul. Any other questions for us? We can hang a little bit. If you're brand new and you have a question, I really would encourage you to ask. It's really complex, and if you haven't done it before, it can seem overwhelming. If you've done it before, renewing really isn't that bad, but it is making sure you have certain systems in place so you'll have success.
Aram, I'm going to jump in. Thank you so very much for going through all of this information with us today. It is a lot to digest. My expectation is that there will be a number of follow-up questions. One of the things I want to quickly do is share with everyone information in regards to the frequently asked questions period, and remind everyone, of course, you've already provided multiple times your email address, but this information will be on Everyone Home's website as well. There's a NOFO page that allows you to see all of the materials that will also be sent out. So you will receive a lot of references and materials in regards to this, but also based on the type of questions we get, if there are certain trends. For example, I heard today a lot of questions about how the DB projects will be ranked and rated. You can anticipate that we will have those FAQs on Everyone Home's website. And so the period of time in which we will take questions in regards to application, process, anything, is this Monday starting today, ending on Friday, September 27th. And we urge your questions. So please send questions. No question is a bad question, and quite frankly, might answer something that others are thinking about as well. And so we will update on our website on an ongoing basis. And with that, I want to make sure that I thank everyone for their participation. We have wrapped up a little early, so I think we'll hang tight in case there are any other questions, but do know that, again, this information will be on Everyone Home's website. By the end of today, you will receive, first of all, a thank you for joining us, but also all of the references and materials that you need to get started. Really looking forward to having a successful application process, one in which we provide great customer service through Homebase, as well as respond to any challenges or issues you may have along the way. And so with that, I will pause and ask if there are any other questions. Please add them in the chat now. If not, this video as well will also be on our website. So something you can always go back and reference.
Can we verbally ask you a question?
Oh, absolutely. I'm unable to see all the faces here.
Yeah, well, my name is Lamisha, and I was my entity is actually in located in Menlo Park, but I service the Bay Area, especially like Alameda County. Would I be eligible?
I'm going to refer to Aram. I think he responded to that question earlier, and I want to make
Right,
sure.
he probably did, and I probably didn't hear it, so that's why I'm coming back.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
good. Thanks, Lamisha. Ultimately, the people who need to be served have to be the people served within the geographic community of Alameda County, and the services have to be accessible by that. I realize the Bay Area, some agencies serve more than one community, but ultimately you need to be a nonprofit that's going to provide service to this geographic area, to these clients that are eligible to the CoC. And if you're doing all that, you should be fine.
Oh, okay, thank you, because I am doing that. I'm actually partnered like with Bax, I refer clients to Bax, also there's like a lot of independent living that I refer my clients to, that I'm connected with a lot of owners that provide independent living. So I do that a lot. Yes. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, just keep in mind, if it wasn't said enough clearly, and I think we're planning to try and do like a CoC 101 in like the next week. So I should plug that as well. Maybe in like maybe Katie knows better the date, but we're going to put something out there. Like if you're totally brand new or you have questions like the one you just asked, we're going to try and be kind of dial back and kind of use less of kind of HUD's language and speak a little more naturally. But the crux of it is that this money is used to house people generally. So if you don't want to run housing, this isn't the thing for you. If you don't want to like manage permanent supportive housing units, do rapid rehousing subsidies, if you're just looking for money for supportive services, this is not the fund for you. This is the fund for supportive services if you're going to do housing, but you got to put most of the bulk is going to be in housing. And as we talk about year over year, the FMR increases and the ways to gain money, the more of your money that is in like rental assistance and doing permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing, the more your portfolio will grow. So it's really it's best suited for people that are going to work with people in housing and work on preserving housing, getting permanent housing, getting income, getting benefits. Like those are kind of the key pieces to this funding source. So
that is
cities have, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that is my primary goal. I am kind of brand new, a little bit startup. My primary goal is to provide rental assistance. So until I get the proper funds to provide the rental assistance, at this time, I do a lot of referring to a lot of places that already is in a position to put these people in or put these people in like permanent supportive housing or, rapid rehousing and things like that. So that's why I am trying to apply for these funds, because I am a reentry and I want to provide rental assistance to my clients, putting them back in any type of housing, reunification, their own apartment under a rental or tenant master lease, so that is my primary goal.
Awesome. And you're hitting up all these little things, and maybe we can speak to some of this more, but reentry and reunification, things to keep in mind. Once someone has been in jail or prison for longer than 90 days, they fail to meet any HUD criteria for homelessness. Something that we're trying to work on across the Bay Area and how to think about this. One of the things that has come up is they've recently issued a lot of what are called EHV vouchers, and those are emergency housing vouchers, and they're supposed to serve people that are coming from the reentry community. So it may be another path that you want to explore specifically for your people, because not everyone is always eligible to get these services. It's really for people like on the street in shelters or been in institutions for less than 90 days, but there are other things you can do. And you can even apply for funding for supportive services if you have access to these other vouchers. So I know it's kind of a bunch, but some of it has to do with like who's actually eligible to be in the services. And so we're happy to answer. Lamisha, if you want to reach out, we can kind of get on a call or figure something out for if this is going to be the right source for you.
Yes, thank you. I'll send an email.
Perfect.
Okay.
There's a question, can cities apply? Cities can apply, just same thing. You're going to be doing the business of housing. And so they can provide those services, and sometimes cities apply and then take, they subcontract out to direct service providers too. And thanks, Katie is putting in the chat, save the date. We'll try and do more for people who it's brand new for.
Yeah, and just to tack onto that very quickly, for those of you who are new to this process, or even those of you who aren't, but know of other projects that could benefit from this, please spread the word about that as far and wide as you possibly can, because we very much want to get new projects involved in this and take advantage of all of this bonus funding. So.
Okay, it appears as though we are at the end of today's session. Thank you all very much for joining us. This information will be posted on the website. You'll receive email as well as this presentation uploaded on the website. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.